Hello YouTube, happy Thanksgiving, first of all. I wanted to do a video about the new atheism and morality and why I think it's stupid. Or I don't think that the people within, the central figures within the new atheist movement, the moralities that they put forward have been convincing or satisfying or interesting or in any way, viable. I wanted to propose. I don't want to propose a counter theory. But I do want to provide a counter argument. And I think that you can notice certain trends within the new atheism. I know a lot of people watching this video will probably say that you can't do that, because the standard line, atheism is not philosophy, blah, 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 blah. But I think that you can take a series of texts. You can take Sam Harris' The Moral Landscape is the obvious one. You can look at Matt Dillahunty did a lecture on what he calls the superiority of secular morality. You can look at for the YouTube community, Theoretical Bullshit's video, which I already did one critique of, but I hope to do more expansive one, or I hope to provide more counter arguments here. And I see in the comments section a lot sentiments which reflect the sentiments which reflect the ideas within those domains. In a couple of Theo Warner's conversations where Vic Mackey has been present, he's advocated a conception of morality that's similar. So I kind of want to draw a circle around those, call that the new atheist morality, and I don't really care if you object to that. But one thing to begin, one thing that all of these ideas share in common is they're all essentially consequentialist philosophies of morality. Consequentialism there's one pitfall that I would point out with regards to consequentialism, which I think is really important and wildly overlooked, and needs to be interrogated a little bit further. First of all, what's a consequence, right? If consequences determine the moral value of an action, and therefore if morality is a prescriptive, regulative discipline, it's supposed to guide our future actions, not just reconstruct and judge our past actions. So if it is regulative, then we ask the question, what's a consequence? Well, one thing that a consequence is it's something that you don't have control over. In that, once you do something, a consequence is something that's going to happen as a result. That is to say, I might have control over the cue ball when I hit it, but once the cue ball starts going, I don't have control over the 8 ball once the cue ball hits the 8 ball, right? So consequences are something that are outside of our will, though they might be generated by our will. They're things that are outside of our will. If this is the case, then there becomes a central issue to consequentialism, which is the problem of autonomy. That is to say, if we allow things that are outside of our will to determine and regulate our will, then we are sacrificing our autonomy. We are sacrificing our ability to self-determine. Whatever that might mean, right? I don't want to get into an issue, a conversation about this could lead to a conversation about free will that I don't necessarily want to have, but I'm sure I'm going to have to fight it out with someone in the comments at some point. But let me phrase it this way. Hopefully it'll cut that off at the pass. To sacrifice the direction of our will, or to give that up to things which are outside of our will, robs us of the experience of self-determination. Regardless of whether or not we are ontologically self-determined, I think we can say certainly that we are phenomenologically self-determined. That's the distinction that I'd make, and I would say that's important. I think that I hold the phenomenological experience of self-determination, of autonomy, as a value. Consequentialism, in a strong sense, threatens autonomy. It threatens our ability to self-determine. This is what leads Kant, and the concern with autonomy is what leads Kant to suggest that morality should be based off of the idea that we do something for its own sake, rather than for the sake of something else, right? So that's my first issue. The problem of autonomy within a consequentialist framework. And I think that problem has a tradition that goes back through the Enlightenment. My second issue is that if we say... Well, I'm trying to decide which one to do first. Let's go with well-being. Well-being seems to be a common center. I think it's probably best to get this one out of the way. I would go along with, Nietzsche critiques utilitarianism, which is a form of consequentialism that suggests that we maximize our happiness. That's the grounds for morality. Sam Harris and other new atheist thinkers, you can see this rhetoric everywhere, talk about it in terms of maximizing human well-being, whatever that might mean. Nietzsche gives this great point against the utilitarians, and I think it still functions against contemporary new atheist consequentialists. He referred to John Stuart Mill as that blockhead. And his critique of utilitarianism is who wants to be happy? Only the British would want to be happy, right? And that's funny. I think it's supposed to be funny, but I think there's a deep insight into it, which is that I don't believe that we want to be happy. I believe that we want to be happy. I think that human psychology is much more complex than a theory that is predicated on the will to happiness. Human psychology is much more complex than a theory of ethics based on the maximizing of happiness or well-being allows for. Again, I don't think that we want to be happy. I think we want to be happy, or we think we want to be happy. I don't think that our motivations are nearly that singular. I don't think that they are reducible to a statement like, you know, we have an interest in maximizing well-being, or, you know, all human beings want to maximize happiness and reduce pain, or something like that. I think that this is implies a naive conception of human psychology. I think it also entails a naive conception and like formalized, alienated conception of human psychology. I think it would be rational for human beings to want to maximize our happiness or well-being. I don't necessarily believe that human beings are entirely rational creatures. Now, I know that you can come back with, well, we ought to. We might not, but we ought to, and we build our ethics based on what we ought to do. Alright. Fine. But I'm just saying, insofar as it's supposed to be predicated on an account of human psychology at all. There's another aspect, too, that's much more disturbing, and it's the problem of, this is my third argument against, it's the problem of I heard Jack Miles once make the idea, or once state the idea of vox populi, vox dei. I'm sure that's not his idea, I'm sure it's an old cliche, I've just heard him say it, so I'm crediting it to him. The notion being, voice of the God, voice of the people. If the voice of God becomes the voice of the people, then you can do anything in the name of the people. So, I think that there is an element of distantiation present in this, in the idea that ethical life is about maximizing happiness and well-being, or some such idea. So Sam Harris, for instance, advocates torture. That is, it seems to me to be wildly unethical. In my view, you can more or less close the book once you get to that. But he does advocate torture, and he does it in such a way where he says, well, you know, we experience empathy, we experience the horror of this. You know, if only there was a way to turn our, like, human disgust at ourselves off, basically. If only there was a pill that would make somebody appear to just go to sleep, but actually put them into a space of, like, horrible pain and suffering and torture. If there was only that, you know, this would be ethical. So the problem for him is turning off our empathy, turning off our human kinship in order to allow ourselves to torture someone else. This is not just unethical. This is anti-ethical, I would say. But he does all of this on the grounds that, well, clearly, you know, we have to torture people. The ticking bomb scenario, you know, the Jack Bauer, well, we might have to do this for the sake of not preventing some catastrophe that would minimize our well-being, and blah, 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 blah. So it all ties back to this notion of human well-being, which there's something interesting in here, because it's not, I am Sam Harris and I advocate torture. It is, I am Sam Harris and I think that it is in the interests of human well-being to allow the state to torture people. The fault is not on me. I am not prescribing this. I have this objective criteria that is prescribing that. It's a similar move, ironically, to I've seen you know, like a gay guy talking to a Christian and being like, well, am I gonna, am I a sinner or something like that, right? And the Christian would say something like, it's not for me to say, it's for God to say, or like should I be in hell? Well, that's not my judgment, that's God's judgment. But yes, you know what I mean? Like, so there's this abstraction, and then that, God in the case of the Christian, and human well-being in the case of Sam Harris. There's an abstraction that you can then use as a scapegoat. It sort of de-traumatizes the issue of torture. In some sense, I feel like this is a gesture of keeping oneself morally clean. Vic Mackey in a conversation with Theo Warner, we were talking about the death penalty, and he tried to go through all these moves of talking about, well, what the purpose of the Justice Department is, and all these very formalistic sort of legal arguments. And when you cleared that all away, he did have I have to commend him. He did have the balls to say, like, no, I am placing my argument on this, but if you were to clear all this away, like, I would be even more enthusiastic about killing them, right? About killing certain kinds of criminals. And that's I don't want to say that that's a formal argument against it. I want to say that that is a suspicion that I have. I am suspicious that this move allows one to alienate oneself from the action that we undertake. And that's even worse. Once you realize that looking at human life through the prism of human well-being requires an active interpretation. So it's not only I am distantiating myself using this objective category, I am presenting this objective category, which is really a subjective construction. And if pressed about it, I would say, well, nobody would say X, Y, or Z. Nobody would believe. So this appeal to use Nietzsche's term, this appeal to the herd, right, which is always bullshit. Like, anytime anybody starts talking like, well, I think everybody would agree that X, This is another way of saying X is self-evident, and anybody who understands the history of philosophy knows that they're about to say something that's full of shit, right? So let's take this one step further. Another issue becomes the origin of ethics, and you see this a lot against vis-a-vis someone like William Lane Craig. You see this a lot in my previous critique of theoretical bullshit. I talked about an anti-religious morality. That is to say, and again, I am an atheist, by the way. What I mean by that is that it is a morality that has been entirely constructed by arguing against religious people. It's been constructed in reaction to religious people, rather than contemplating, moral existence, right? And I think that that's a big problem with the new atheism and morality. I think that that's a big failing of the new atheism and morality, is that their conception of morality has been constructed almost solely on the basis of arguing against religious people. The common trend in this is that somebody presents, just go to Theoretical Bullshit and his video, a treatise on morality, or go to read Sam Harris's The Moral Landscape, watch Matt Delahunty's lecture. Every example you come across will be, here is my moral point, and this is so much better than the religious person's because blah, 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 blah. So immediately like, again, Theoretical Bullshits is not a treatise on morality. That's just not what it is. It's always in dialectic with the religious person. It's always in response to the religious person. This is a deep problem. I think that we shouldn't murder people because it's antisocial to murder people or something. And this conception is so much better than the religious person's idea. If you look at the Bible, they do all this. And blah, blah, blah. So, like, that is a sign that you're about to have some problems. I think ethically, you're creating blind spots for yourself. You're focusing on interlocutor and you are putting on blinders. That's a problem, and I think that's true. That generalizes across the New Atheist movement. I do not think that morality is a field of counter-apologetics. I do not think that. I think there are plenty of non-religious forms of morality that aren't guilty of this. On top of that, but that aside, but I do think that that's an important issue, and I wanted to keep it up. The origins of morality, right? You'll typically get a sociobiological account of morality. Our evolution imbues us with certain pack instincts, basically, that have been sort of refined and propagated through language and culture and society and blah, 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 blah. I have my doubts about the historicity of that. I think that, for instance, if you look at Nordic culture, show me. I feel like you can't say that rape being wrong emerges from our evolution, for instance. And again, look at Nordic culture, right? Medieval Nordic culture, right? Vikings, I can't, if you think about rape, I can't figure, I feel like that would be something that would have nothing to do with the prohibition against rape. I feel like that would have nothing to do with our biology. But let me say this, I think that we do have a set of pack instincts. That much is clear. And I think that those pack instincts have been refined socially. I think that much is clear as well. We can call this our inherited morality, just for the sake of it, just to give it a label so that I can deal with it. I would actually affirm the religious critique of this. I would say, what makes this good? But I would do it in a different way. I would say, what if we can do better? Right? Like, what if we can reinvent ethics in a way that transcends our inherited morality? I don't see any reason why that's not possible. I don't think that would be possible I think that when someone like William Lane Craig says that, I think that he wouldn't think it's possible to create a higher morality than the morality of God. So when I'm saying it's a very different spirit. You know, what makes our herd instincts so good? Why do we want to hold on to them? Why not work to transcend them? You know, why not begin sketching up new conceptions of morality and look at our inherited morality as something transitory. So that's not a problem when talking about the origins of morality. But when you try to say why morality is binding, when you try to bring that to bear on the modern world, then it becomes a problem. And I've seen that move a few times. I don't think that we should define, one step further, I don't think that we should define morality in terms of sociobiological, inheritance. I think that prevents us from developing new modes of life and communication and new modes of ethical being. So that's important as well. I believe I had another critique of it. Oh well. Suicide for Celluloid here, signing out. Have a good night, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving.